Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, Amin. I know we missed last week because of Easter. Happy Easter, everyone. Happy Ramadan to everyone who celebrates. This month is very special for our Middle Eastern community and in North Africa with regards to Arab American Heritage Month, Chaldean American Month. So we are very happy to celebrate that. And today we have a guest who is Amina Amin, and she is Egyptian. Welcome, Amina.
Hello, lovely to meet you all.
So,
and
Amina,
thank you for having me.
Thank you for participating. Amina was born in Cairo. Dr. Amin is a dentist by profession. She has always been interested in literary and cultural issues. Her articles, ranging from book and movie reviews to explorations of the internet and the future of Egyptian culture, have appeared in major Egyptian newspapers and literary magazines. She has also translated several literary works from Arabic into English and vice versa. To this end, in 1998, she founded Arab World Books, an online cultural club dedicated to the promotion of Egyptian and Arab writing. This website is nonprofit and entirely staffed by volunteers. So, Amani, I know that this is how we met, by the way, is through the Arab World Books, because I think I shared one of my books at the time. And all I remember about you is that you were so supportive and still are. And you're so welcoming, so supportive, so open-minded. Very interesting platform that really highlights so many books, Arabic books. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit about your childhood and then, how your upbringing influenced you toward literature and the cinema. So tell us about that.
Well, you go down memory lane, memory lane. But as far as I can remember, I think books were always a big part of my life. I remember the highlight of any children's birthday party I was invited to. Was to carefully choose a book for a gift. I'm not sure now that I'm older whether my friends appreciated the love and care it took to choose these books, or whether they would have preferred to have a toy. I don't know. But I grew up with Enid Blyton's. I loved Enid Blyton's adventure books, The Famous Five and The Mountain of Thunder. That I remember always. I loved Shakespeare. I loved all the classics I was introduced to in school. I always cherished every year's visit to the book fair, the Cairo Book Fair. And I was lucky to be able to go with my parents as well as with my school on trips. I always found interesting books on my aunts and uncles' shelves at my grandmother's place, where I would go and read. And some were actually very hard. I remember Being a Nothingness by John Paul Sartre. I remember the rise and fall of the European empires. It was also there that I had an experience that it was transforming for me, and I always remember that. I was about 14, and I started reading Nawal Saadawi for the first time. And suddenly there were all these questions going up in my head, and I found myself reading the Bible, the Quran, the Old Testament, all simultaneously. And the strange thing, this was actually a very small bookshelf, my aunt's at my grandmother's place, but still, I was very lucky to find all these books there.
And did you read? You were reading in Arabic. All these books, everything that you were reading was in Arabic?
Not necessarily. My aunt was a student at the American University. Both my uncle and aunt were fluent in English, so there was a choice of both books. In my parents' house, it was a mixture. I went to a language school, British school, when I was kid, so I was actually introduced in kindergarten to English. I only started Arabic in second grade. Um, so reading to me was very easy in both languages. So I had a source of both languages at home, at my parents, and at my grandmother's place, and the books I could go and buy.
Interesting. So I didn't know that you had that background from the time that you were very young. I thought it was like when you were older. So what how did you, given your love for literature, but you became a dentist? So did you become a dentist? It was something that you wanted to get into the field, and the other aspect you felt like was more of a hobby? Did you try to write anything, or how did that happen over the years career wise?
Mainly, I was focused on being a dentist. I mean, this is what I wanted to study. This is what I loved. Even when I met my husband and we got married, my husband is actually, when I married my husband, he was an engineer. Speaking of different hats, my husband, when I married my husband, he was an engineer. A few years later, he became a diplomat. And ever since he was maybe 15 or 16, he was writing. So now that he's retired, he's completely dedicated to his writing. So, of course, that had also had an influence on me. Uh, but when until he started becoming a diplomat and we started traveling, I was just a dentist wanting to start my own practice. And even with our first posting to the US in the 80s, I focused on taking the exams for the dental board. Um, and I remember, and I hadn't focused on anything. I mean, I remember when we left after finishing the exams, and colleagues at the time were, I mean, thought I was completely crazy to leave a career in the US that promised in the late 80s, 100,000 a year, which was like, how dare you? So, but I did that. I was focusing on I mean, the most important thing for me was my family. And I was looking forward to going to see other countries. And, but over time, when you start I went on traveling and traveling and traveling, and then the problem started, that I needed to do something else, and it was then that I started experimenting with writing, with translations, and so forth.
Is that when you started Arab World Books?
It was a bit later on. I mean, the early 90s, it was kind of a soul searching, trying to find out what will Amani do with her life if I can't be practicing dentistry while I'm on 4-year postings or 5-year postings. My husband being I mean, a writer as well, he started telling me, you can write anywhere, why don't you write? And I started experimenting with writing. I helped him with, I mean, he was writing a novel in the early 90s, and I helped him with all the research work. Um, I, I tried to adapt. I took one of his stories and tried. I entered the competition. Well, I didn't win anything, but I entered the competition that the BBC ran. Uh, um, so I changed one of his stories into a radio script. Um, so it was just experimentation. But then in the end, I mean, when I found in '98, I started Arab World Books. In March 1998, I thought then that the internet would be a great opportunity to pay tribute to the writers who have enriched my life. And since I was traveling around the world on diplomatic postings, I needed to overcome this challenge of my physical location. I needed to build an entity that did not fall apart every time I moved.
Mm.
Arable Books, I mean, the way I see it, is dedicated to enhance understanding between different cultures. And I'm proud that over the years it has become a destination for researchers and centers of Arab studies around the globe.
So you've traveled, and actually you've lived in Paris, France, Washington, D.C., Zimbabwe, Geneva, Switzerland, Australia, Beirut, Lebanon, so many different places. How has that influenced you as a writer, and just your input even in the literary, and how has that influenced you? I can imagine like you have such a broad perspective on the world.
Um, First of all, I don't ever look upon myself as a writer. I mean, this the time I experimented with writing was it was an experiment. It was an experiment, and then once I found I discovered the internet, and I tried to use it as a tool to, of course, again. Married to a writer who had problems with publishing, and I mean, I could see what writers go through at the beginning. So to me, it was something that I needed to do, and that was what I focused on. I was also focused on giving voice to writers that um, live in outside the center, outside the capital. Not, I mean, before the internet, I mean, not everybody had a voice. I mean, people who lived in the capital or the cities had a better chance of exposure than someone who lived uh, in the um, in the villages or outside of the in other villages. So that was important to me. It was also important to me to build bridges between Arabs who live in the Arab world and those who live outside of the Arab world. So that was I mean, Arab world books became my main focus, not writing. As, I don't look at myself and see a writer or see a translator. Far from that.
So how what does the platform Arab World Books provide, and how has it grown over the years?
Um, well, mainly, like I said, Arab world books highlights the ideas, the books, and the women and men who create them. The core of the website has always been the author bios, their books, as well as the writing. This was, I mean, I started in 1998, so a couple of years later, early in 2000, by January 2001, I started two programs. One was the Writers' Workshop, um, and actually I have to give credit to my husband there, because he was the one. He's been running the Writers' Workshop now for 23 years. Book club has also been running for over 23 years. In the book club, we featured a mixture of fiction and non-fiction books. Um, we had, I mean, you would remember we had the opportunity featuring your novel, The Feminine Art, in September of 2010. And I do invite our guests to see the file we have on WM Namu, who has many talents, not just writing. You can see her bio, her writings, discussion of her book, as well as her work in film.
Yeah, and I appreciated that at the time because I noticed that you don't hesitate of providing platforms for any kind of books. So what are the topics? I saw that in in the platform that it was very open minded, welcoming, and so usually when I came out with a new book and I shared it with you and you said, okay, we're adding it, we're including it into your page. So
Mhm,
that type of support is very necessary, as of course you kind of mentioned. So there's a lot of underrepresented writers in all countries, but
mhm,
in the Arab world in general, there are a lot of underrepresentation with writers. I feel like in the United States, where sometimes only certain narratives are told, and usually,
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry, I
um,
didn't get that.
yeah, usually only certain narratives are told, and not necessarily the
Mhm,
positive narratives.
mhm,
So
yes.
yeah, I really appreciate what you do. So, given your experience and all these years with Arab World Books and just reading so much, how would you say has the Arab literary scene changed over the decades, particularly after the Arab Spring period during the early 2010s?
Hmm. Um, well, I have to say, history is a very important component in literature. We can never isolate literature from historical, political, and economic backgrounds. Anytime there is a radical shift or turning point in history, you will find that portrayed in writing. Um, we see literature that is non-compliant, for example, with strict literary rules, breaking all restrictions, enjoying absolute freedom. Um, we also find a sense of alienation due to spatial and emotional displacement, which happen to writers who have been displaced from their country of origin or even within it. Um, you also see the question of identity that surfaced, especially in countries that contain many sects and ethnicities. In general, in the past 2 decades, we have definitely seen a wealth of new literature emerging, many new young writers, and the maturing of earlier ones. We see a lot more experimentation, a lot more audacity in tackling taboos or thorny issues. We also see new genres, completely new genres, hitting the market with very high readership. You find, especially with the young, who are hungry for thriller books and horror books. Um, I think there's also been a rise in interest in the historical novel.
And what about with regards to the cinema? I know, Cairo is known as the Hollywood of the Arab world, and we were talking earlier, and me myself, that's I grew up with that culture, with seeing all these Arabic, beautiful Arabic movies, and I was also sharing how when I was in Iraq, I was like 8, 9 years old, and the day that they would play uh, شاهد ما شافش حاجة or مدرسة المشاغبين with Adil Imam, the whole country closed down for those couple of hours in order for us to view this comedy and this beautiful acting that was being done. But all of their films, for many, many years, we really just had such a great connection to them. How would you say, yourself having reviewed movies, and what has the change been in that area? And how
I
has the
can,
influence, what has been the change over the decades with regards to film? And is there a connection between the literary world and film? Here in the United States, many of the books that become very popular are turned into movies.
Mhm.
Does that also happen in Cairo?
um, one thing you notice, I mean, over the years, there was only Egyptian cinema at one time. Uh, to the extent that you could actually, for example, I had, when I was in France, I had a Tunisian friend. I could speak with her because she knew the Egyptian dialect very well, very easily. Uh, Definitely that was the influence of Egyptian cinema. Um, I couldn't do that with her husband. I had to speak, although French is my third language, I had to speak in French um, with her husband, who is from Tunisia, rather than Arabic, because I couldn't understand a word of his Tunisian Arabic. But I think this is completely changing. I mean, you find the industry now is not solely Egyptian. You find cinema everywhere in the Arab world. Um, but I mean, all art is a source of ideas and innovation. Whether it is a film based on literature or literature taken from an idea seen in a movie or an art exhibition or even a dance show, all are just part of the creative process. So usually different art forms flourish together, and you definitely see that in the Arab world.
Yeah, and you're right about that. I think the film has, storytelling has, people are now able to use it in so many different mediums. And I've even seen great movies from Saudi Arabia, places that you normally wouldn't
Mhm.
think that you would see such creativity or freedom in the arts in that way. But you start witnessing it. And I really get happy when I see these things, because then you see these stories that you don't really imagine. And this is, you know, these are the stories that we kind of need more of. They're just more realistic. Growing up, aside from the Egyptian cinema. Here in the United States, I used to be very attracted to foreign films because I felt like the foreign films gave the authentic stories to each community. But I at that time I found it lacking with Middle Eastern culture. But now we're seeing more and more of it. Um, so, from your observation, what has been the biggest challenge for writers in the Arab world, especially because there is the I mean, this is happening even here in the United States where there are cancellations of certain books or book talks. And, so this is unfortunately happening. But again, the governments in the Arab world is different. And so regarding freedom of speech and writers, what do you think is the biggest challenge? Is that a biggest challenge, or now with the internet, there is more freedom about how one expresses themselves?
Definitely, with the internet, there's more freedom. I mean, like I said, it's you can't keep people are not in a cocoon anymore. You can't do that. People see what's going on around in the world. But it's the same. I mean, I think the problems and the challenges are the same everywhere. Um, I mean, even if some countries are more lucky than others, but in the Arab, I mean, the writers have the same problems. I mean, first, it's the challenge of getting a good education, the essential and formative period and training needed to work on oneself as a writer. Then the process of finding a publisher, and definitely a good editor. Editor mainly is the main problem, I think, in the Arab world. It is still very hard to find good editors here. Um, Also, marketing. The burden of marketing is being borne by the author more and more, uh, instead of the publisher or otherwise. And then, last but not least, there's always the chance of being translated.
So you've dealt with a lot of authors, but on a personal level, you've worked very closely with your husband and watched the challenge of, as an author, trying to, from the time that you're writing the piece, normally, which takes many, many years. I mean, some of my writings, The Great American Family, which I did a documentary on, the book took 6 years and the documentary 8 years, and nobody probably from reading or watching the film would guess either one of these things.
Definitely.
Yeah, and a lot of research, so it's not just the writing but the research, and just, it's a lot of work. So you've seen that. What advice would you give writers going through the process to help them get from that stage up that hill? What is the one thing or a couple of things that you can suggest to help them hold on?
Work on themselves. Definitely work on themselves. I mean, uh, they have to read a lot. I mean, I find a lot of. I mean, through our writers' workshop, I find a lot of wannabe writers who have not read anything and they expect to be writing a novel very quickly and publishing it, and I find that very weird. I mean, this is like you said, it took you 6 years to get a novel out. It just doesn't happen that way. You have to have read so many books before you can start writing anything. Um, and when once you do that, once you work very well on yourself and are able to write, then you should seek publishing, not before.
So work on, yeah, there is that sense of hurry because there is with the writing, there's a requires to be a lot of patience in the process. And
Especially with the young. Especially with the young. I
with the
mean,
young. And
the
we're in
main problem I see now is with the young.
and with because of this generation, I have kids that are like teenage ages, and there's just a sense of everything being faster and shorter, and because
Mhm.
of the internet. And so the internet has brought us a lot of wonderful things, and short is good too, sometimes with quick things and the distractions. But the writing a book requires the patience to read a lot of books and the patience to
Okay.
work on each chapter. So you're definitely right about that. um so our stories, Arab American stories, I think they're underrepresented. I think here in the United States, when I do interviews, I had an interview yesterday, asking me about this, and I always talk about the underrepresentation. So in my case, I know that even though the United States has had a relationship with Iraq for so many years and decades and all the wars, most of the stories are told by Westerners. So our perspectives are not really seen, and the part that is shown tends to be either as a victim or a terrorist. And that middle ground, the authentic side of us, doesn't get to be told because it's normally not being told by us. Why, um, I don't know if you feel the same way about us. You've traveled quite a bit, so you've seen
Being visible, the
being
visibility.
visible. Why, what do you attribute to that? And then what steps can people take, especially, of course, writers, filmmakers? What steps can we do to help change that?
Um, definitely, I agree with you. We're underrepresented. We're not visible enough at all. Even though the Arabic titles acquired for translation has risen in the past 2 decades, it is still very marginal. Research that I read about coming out recently from the Frankfurt Book Fair records 310 titles were translated into English between 1999 to 2020 to 2010. While the 2010 to 2020 period records 596 titles, which is, this is peanuts. It's not enough. And the problem I see is always the same. International publishers and editors do not know the language. The knowledge of the Arab world is still tied to Orientalist perceptions or obtained from negative media coverage in the West. It is promising to see that some publishers realize the importance of the role of editors. We have also started seeing, trying to look at the positive sides of how to correct that. So definitely the role of editors is very important in the Arab world because that's missing a lot. It is also promising to see some events or cultural workshops where writers, critics, editors, and translators and publishers come together to discuss the industry. There's also it's very helpful also that all the respected competitions and awards in the Arab world, such as the Arabic Booker, Zayed Awards, the Sawiris Foundation Awards, the Naguib Mahfouz Medal for Literature. All these continue to give exposure to writing in the Arab world, and of course, and hence helps in translation, helps in the exposure, also gives the chance for translation, the better chance for translation.
Yeah, that is encouraging. And I have been seeing more and more work out there. And I think, for people to just know that the more we do, and the more quality work that we do, the better for us as individual writers and for the community. Because we are seeing, Cairo and Mesopotamia, Egypt. These are historically the cradles of civilization. There's so much richness, but that richness seems to be compartmentalized into that part of the history and not brought into the modern world because of the wars and the other negative things that happen. But again, there is an opportunity for us to tell our stories and to help bring awareness just by sharing an authentic story and not so much propaganda or anything like that. So with the last couple of words, we only have a few minutes. I think we agree that there's a lot of misconceptions, stereotypes out there that we can help dispel. Any parting thoughts before we leave for authors, writers, and how can people connect with you?
With me, you mean Arab books or
yes. Well, yeah. Since you had it. Mm-hmm.
Well, Arab Books is online. It's arabworldbooks.com. It's open for any writer of Arab origin. We also accept writers who are international writers who are connected in one way or another to the Arab world. They write their themes has something to do with our region. Um, we put bios for the writer, and it's all free service. It's like a database for writers. I mean, I wish I could put everybody myself, but I do depend a lot on the writers contacting us themselves, or making their own, putting up their own pages themselves. I can't do this myself. So they contact the
Actually, this is,
website, they can register, they can start an account, they can put their bios, they can send their books. It's up to them.
you know what, this is an excellent point, because one thing I think authors sometimes do, or writers, they tend to be too much behind their computers into the story and don't do the reaching out. Because I reached out to you, I introduced myself, and I do that oftentimes because I realize that the writing, I write it, yes, first and foremost, I'm the writer and I have that relationship, but I want the piece to be eventually read. So I do the reaching out, and I think maybe this is something that Arab writers have to understand, the value of that, to get their stories out, not just about writing them, but to know how to reach their audience.
Also nowadays, it's because I mean, it's been, we've been online for 25 years, and I tell you, I mean, it's um, the interest was a lot more in the beginning, when there was nothing else. I mean, it was just Arable books online. But then with the social media starting, such as Facebook, a lot of writers started just writing on their own Facebook pages. And I don't discourage that. It's very important and so forth. But it's really also important to be under an umbrella where there's like a database where all writers are in one place, and it's a reference for everybody else. Uh, the way, I mean, like in the olden days, when you would go and find an encyclopedia find information in an encyclopedia, it's one thing, but looking for someone's Facebook page is completely another.
Community is definitely important. Yes, it's
Mhm.
definitely important. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was nice to talk so long with you. Usually we're just emailing each other. So thank you for all that you do. You do amazing work. I didn't know that your husband is also a writer, and I hope that, obviously your site is going to continue to grow. It's been around for a long time, but who knows, maybe one of these days there could be some kind of a collaboration, or more work to bring visibility to these writers.
Can I just say some thank you words?
Oh, of course.
Do I have time for thank you words?
Yes, you have time. You have
I,
time.
I would like to thank you all for this honor. As we celebrate Arab American heritage, we should remember that it is all about recognizing Arab American achievements. Every effort, however small, has paved the way towards this recognition. I consider myself lucky to have crossed paths with many of you along the years, here at the Chaldean Culture Center, the Arab American National Museum, Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, the ADC, the Arab American Foundation, the Muslim Women Association, to count a few. Your efforts will always bear fruit, and Arabs around the world should be proud of their heritage as well as their diversity, and try to excel in what they do. And that is the only way we could make a lasting contribution. Thank you very much.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Amani. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you for
day.
having me.
Take
Thank you
care.
for having me. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.